Okay. So today, one of the things I really wanted to go through was, thanks, Pradeep. Thanks for joining me. Um, in a sense, consolidate some of the stuff that we have been discussing over a period of time in terms of what the systemic approach is, what, uh, let's say, the various levels of team coaching and systemic coaching are, and some of the processes that we can potentially use, some of them that I have used. And the reason that I have invited Pradeep here is Pradeep, Yogesh, Trace, and I, we were together in a panel at the APAC conference, and all three of them have a lot of experience in systemic coaching. And I would like Pradeep to come in at some points in time and share his experiences as well. And as always, whatever is being, I mean, whenever you want to come in with questions and so on. So before that, I just wanted to, in a sense, you all would have got the mailers. Next month, the whole of October, from the 1st to almost the 1st of November, every day of the week except the weekends, we have about 24 or 25 colloquium sessions, and each of them will have 90 minutes of CCEUs. So hopefully we would see many of you out there. And Magda is sending you out the link as well. As I went through it, I mean, it's not so much for the promotion. You will be getting the mailers and so on. You'll getting the details. We have probably some of the best coaches in the world joining us in that. We have Peter Hawkins coming in on systemic leadership team coaching. We have David Clutterberg, who's written literally 100 books, and he's one of the founders of EMCC, and he has written books on team leadership, coaching. We have Janet Harvey coming in. We have Barry Johnson on polarities, Leon Vanderpool on deep coaching. We have Alan Seal with his model. There are multiple people who are coming in there. And equally importantly, we have a number of practicing coaches who may not be that well internationally known from different parts of the world coming together to form panels on discussing subjects which we believe are going to be extremely relevant to coaching in future. Quite a few of them are centered around women, diversity, and inclusion. And there's one on confidence gap, a panel which is being led by Janet Harvey. We have one by Ashu Soyash, who's CEO of CRISIL in India. She is bringing in a team of leaders, women leaders, discussing about what needs to be done to enhance the presence of women in leadership positions. Magda is putting together a team to discuss about some of the issues which are relevant to not just women, but underprivileged, diverse groups, and so on and so forth. And there is also a panel which could be considered controversial, but we have generally deliberately put it together, of 5 people coming from different faiths. The Christian faith, the Buddhist, the Judaism, Islamic, Hinduism, and so on, and who are going to discuss about what is it that we can do through coaching, with the help of coaching, to reduce the intolerance that we currently have, to get over the prejudices and so on. Pradeep, are you able to hear me? Because there was something there in the chat box saying that there's a problem about hearing.
No, I can hear you now. I was not able to figure out how to. You put me on the mat by making me a panelist.
That's okay.
I thought. So I couldn't figure out how to join when you asked.
No. You couldn't join. Somebody had to promote you.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Maybe 2 audios on at a time. We can hear Trace Hobson and Rams. I don't know how you can hear Trace Hobson. I don't know whether Trace is here in this. I don't see him in the panel, and I don't see him in attendees. Anyway, so if I'm okay, Magda, please let me know in case there is some problem with the audio. You're not able to hear me, in which case I have to do something about it. So the thing that came up to me was that many of these subjects that we are discussing, which are going to be with panels on diversity, inclusion, all that, as well as things on religion and a few other issues, which we want to deliberately bring up as societal issues, are really systemic issues. And so the systemic approach is not merely on a corporate level. It can be in a much larger level at a society level. And my belief is that over a period of time, if coaches are really serious about it, we should do something about applying the systemic approach to whatever little that we can do in our own capacity to change what's happening in society today. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. It can always be better. So that is one thing that I would just leave with you. And what I would also like to have is more and more people who are in this forum, also from next year onwards, come together as panelists to conduct programs on their own. They can do it on the monthly colloquiums, which are on the third Wednesdays, as well as what we plan for next year. Typically, we try and freeze our panel by about, this year, October, we did it sometime around April, May, and then gradually refine it so that we could get the final panel that we have today. And truly glad to say that these are probably amongst the best that you will ever hear. And in places like WBEX and so on, which are excellent, they get equally good people. You pay money. Here it is free. So to that extent, you might like to use this forum. In fact, people like David Goldsmith, who's doing a specific program with WBEX, and he has appeared on WBEX. He's doing this program with us as well. David Peterson could not join. We are trying to get next year Otto Sharma, Edgar Schein, people like that, which I'm reasonably sure we would be able to. We are getting people who are going to represent National Training Laboratory in presenting about organizational development. So the whole thing is really in advancement of what coaching is about, in advancement of what coaching can do, not just merely as, yes, for many of us it's a profession. I wouldn't like to pretend it's otherwise for me. But at the same time, is there a part of it that we can use for a larger good in terms of trying to do something differently in terms of societal transformation? So before I go on and invite Pradeep as well to share, if you look at Peter Hawkins's definition of systemic team leadership coaching, there's a 1-hour video. He has spoken with us in Coacharya, but there is also a separate ICF presentation that he has made, which is worthwhile looking at, easily available on YouTube. He talks about 4 or 5 levels of progression in terms of leadership team coaching. The first level he talks about as facilitation, where the groups interact. The coach or the facilitator is merely there to, as the word implies, the lubricant, guide them perhaps, like in a lab process. The other one is in terms of what he calls performance team leadership coaching, where there are specific objectives. It's not that the team wants to just go around discussing whatever they want, but there are specific objectives. So there's a bit of a guiding, there's a bit of a process that is involved. And then there is a leadership level team coaching with the stakeholders involved, and the objectives are much more clear. They are far more defined in terms of what the stakeholders want. Then we come into the 2 levels of systemic coaching. One he calls as a transformational systemic coaching, which works with the individuals, the teams, as well as the larger systemic objectives. And finally, what he calls as the ecosystemic coaching, which goes even beyond the corporate entity or the organizational entity. I mean, these are things that you can define whichever way you want, but essentially the relationship is between 3 entities, the 3 entities being the self, the individual, others who are part of a team or a community or a tribe, whatever you might want to call it. It could be a family, it could be a group of people in an organization, it's a larger groups, and finally the total system of the organization. And at these various levels, various interactions happen. Like in one of the sessions earlier, Trace beautifully pointed out, and this is part of that methodology of that Alan Seal uses. So there are these spaces within the individual when the individual is creating awareness. There is space between the individual and the other individuals in the group. There's something that is happening. And then between the various individuals, there is something happening. So there are multiple levels, points and potentialities that the interaction takes place. And that's really the beauty of systemic work. That's the beauty of teamwork, where you are creating almost as if, instead of just different atoms and molecules being out there independently, there is this creative tension, there is this attraction and repulsion. It's exactly like what you would describe nature to be in terms of a molecular atomic structure, almost like a quantum physics kind of exercise where people in the group come together, move apart. But there is a larger order around which all of this works. It's not chaos. There is a larger order around this, the working. And Peter Hawkins also defines another 5 levels of how the process can work. He calls them as connecting, which is basically one about how do you contract in a systemic exercise. What is it that really individuals want? What is it really that the organization wants? And in between, what is it the team would like to develop, which is linking the aspirations of the individuals with the aspirations of the larger organizations. And that is really the most important part of team or systemic coaching, because what we are moving here is from purely individual levels of coaching, where it's about the aspirations and the value systems of the individuals, to a larger organizational imperative. And that is much easier to measure. That's also much more cost effective, value effective as far as the organization is concerned. The second stage of that, after connecting, he calls it co-creating, which is about building a team, where there are many processes that we can use. I typically prefer to use processes of appreciative inquiry or large-scale interactive program. Many of you are familiar with appreciative inquiry. David Coacharya. Large-scale interactive process is something that we used in last Coacharya conference in Bangalore, with Cindy leading it. It is Catherine Danmuller. So there are 5 stages. We can go into it in detail if any of you are not familiar with it. And it's about how do you set norms for the team, how do you form the team, and eventually through storming and so on, the team arrives at a transformation actually. And that is the whole purpose of the co-creating part. Then he talks about the clarifying part, which is setting up a vision for the team. And the team collectively, once they have bonded, they have formed, they work towards this common objective, which is aligned to the larger organizational objective. And then he talks about 2 more stages. One is called commissioning, which is in terms of creating actions like an IC of competency, the 9, 10, 11 parts. And finally, what he calls as core learning, which I would like to try and equate it to anchoring, which we call as a 3A model in Coacharya: awareness, action, and anchoring, where the new ideas, the new habits, the new thoughts, the new beliefs replace the old ones and they get anchored. And that's a core learning that happens within the team. In a way, this also sort of can be matched with Peter Senge's 5 disciplines as well, if you care to. So there are multiple ways of doing that. So what I would like to do is, if I know there may be different ways that we all look at this. We discussed some of it in the APAC conference when we had the panel. At this point in time, at least to break the monotony, to stop me from talking, would you like to share something?
I'm sure the people would like to have you continue and talking all the way. Anyway, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Pradeep here. I have an exposure to systemic. In addition to what you said, Ram, all the things that you said, one of the things about systemic coaching is the individual, it's the interconnectivity between the individuals and the other individuals. And all those individuals are actually come together in most circumstances because there is something called an environment from which they come. And it was whether that environment is an organization. So far, I think systemic coaching, a lot of people have talked about it in the context of organizations. It works, and it was music to my ears when you talked earlier about the fact that you guys looking at how you can use systemic coaching in different environments and for the larger good of society. I think that was music because it can be used. But one of the additional variables which I'd like to add to the variables that you spoke about, or the entities you spoke about, if you will, is in addition to the dynamics that operates between people, people come into the context, or come in for systemic coaching with a context. And I think it's equally important to understand the context of the individuals who have come in, because the context has its own role to play in the forces that are acting upon the individual in that setting. I don't know whether I'm clear. Does that make sense, Ram?
Absolutely, absolutely. I just would like to add to that. You heard Trace talking when we were in the panel. The context actually creates energy for the group.
Right. And therefore, from a systemic coaching perspective, or from a coaching perspective, or coach's perspective, it's extremely important to understand that context. And by the way, in my experience, that context starts taking its own shape as the process unfolds. That's the other beauty about it, because people are responding to that context. People are responding to the environment in which you're holding, you're getting a set of people together and doing coaching. That context morphs as you go through the process. So as an example, I might have come to this group, and I'll stay with the organizational context. I might have come to this group as a member of, as a client, so to speak, or one of the clients in a group of clients who are going through a systemic coaching process. Now, when I walk into the group, I have a certain perception about my context. As the coaching unfolds, because when the coaching unfolds, you're doing it, as Ram said, and as everyone has said, at individual level, at a group level, my perception of that context changes. And that itself changes the energy for me. So I perceived, let's say, my organization or my situation in a particular way when I walked in. But as systemic coaching unfolds, as learning occurs, I realize from other perspectives that I get, that the way I was looking at my context is different. That changes the whole dynamics again. So I think from a coach's perspective, there's so many, to take an analogy from Ram, you're really operating in multiple force fields when you're doing systemic coaching. And that sort of ups the antenna and demands from the coach.
Pradeep, I wasn't planning to go through this, but that is what the brilliance of some of these discussions are. Taking that cue, one of the things, I don't know whether we briefly discussed it when we were talking about it for the panel. One of the experiences that I had with what is called the sensitivity training lab, and I think you also had gone through these before, was that in a group setting, which is not even really a team, and even there it works extremely powerfully. In a team, it can be structured to work even more powerfully. How that whole process of someone expressing what you call the context. Why am I here? In the sense of what am I feeling now? What are my body sensations? What are my emotions? What are my thoughts? What they call SET, sensations, emotions, and thoughts. Expressing it openly without fear. And then other people picking up from there and very appreciatively expanding on that in terms of what do they hear? How does it land on them? And then they move forward. I think that's one of the most powerful ways of how the team starts forming. So the context in many ways sets the, I would say, the energy that is required for the group to move forward. A couple of people who I know have done a lot of work on this in India, amongst people that we know. Yogesh has done a lot of work on this. Perhaps you might like to describe some of the experiences that you have had. And I'm trying to see if I can get, Magda, if you're listening, can you please put Ujjwal on the panel, because I know that Ujjwal has done quite an amount of work on the systemic approach as well. So if both of you share, then I can come up with some of my experiences in terms of what you're talking about, context, and how that can be. Thanks, Ujjwal. Thanks for joining. So would you like to go first, Pradeep? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share with you a different and another experience that I have, which is really, there is a program that ISB conducts, which is called Leadership Skills for Top Managers. And essentially a lot of that learning revolves around the 360 that the participants come with. So you can imagine the context. Context is a set of senior people have come for this program. They've got their 360 done. I don't think they ever know that their 360 is going to be openly discussed in a group setting. And we go as coaches to facilitate the learning from that 360 and action planning around it, right? So 2 points, just about the context and the energy of the context. First and foremost, the beauty of this is what I've found in my experience, and I've been doing it for very long, is how you set the tenor as a coach. Because at the end of the day, this is an educational institution. People have come there, they expect, there is a certain expectation, if you will, from a role that is given to this coach, right? That's part of context. A coach needs to be extremely sensitive to that expectation. And essentially what you got to do is create a space for learning so that people can feel comfortable to share their 360 feedback, because that's exactly what they will be doing in the group, and learning from each other. Now, how you turn that expectation around, how you introduce those sessions, because it's up to you to introduce those sessions. How you introduce those sessions makes a significant difference in laying the context for what's going to happen going forward. And I find that itself is a, for some people, it's a shift in energy, because the initial energy when they are told that they have to go into a room and discuss 360, you can imagine how apprehensive that can be for people, correct? And these are, you're sharing with strangers. It was much more difficult when we had to do this with internal organizations. I mean, it was a different order of magnitude of difficulty. And then as a coach, you talked about facilitation, you talked about performance objectives, you see all of this in operation, because we do this over a period of time. It's not, we do this, I think overall we have about 10 to 12 hours of actual work with them over a period of 3-4 days, right? So you start with the facilitation. You then move to facilitation as quickly as possible, because what you need to give away is the context of you being the coach to you just being there, because all of them bring the experience from which they come. Is that something you had in mind, Ram, in terms of changing the forces that work?
Yes. What you mentioned was, like, for example, 360, what I guess you were referring to was anonymous feedback. I'm just wondering if this were to be used, let's say, in a specific smaller team setting. For instance, if you have a business leader, a CEO perhaps, and you have typically, most organizations today are matrix. So you have, let's say, 2 or 3 staff business heads of, let's say, HR, finance, and technology, and then you have 3 or 4 people who are handling different businesses. So maybe there are 7, 8 people. Now, how do you open them up? One of the cases that I had recently working with an organization was, and again, each one leads into something really important, very important. We did a EUM study, which we have talked about. Ashok has come here in this forum and talked about it. I find it a far superior tool and a process than Barrett's and so on for larger cultural studies and organizational interactions. And using that framework, what I found was that the whole team per se was averse to getting into any kind of confrontation.
Right.
They would always prefer the diplomatic, bury things under, let's talk about it, politically correct, socially correct, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that needed to happen was, how do they open up and talk about, and maybe not exactly in a form of a 360, but can they start sharing what they feel about each other in an appropriate way? And from there, does a context emerge? And the context does emerge. As you correctly said, each one of them has an individual focus. Each one of them has an individual aspiration. And the simple question that I asked each one of them was, okay, what is that aspiration that you have? What is it that today is holding you back from fulfilling that aspiration in a collective sense? What is it that this team out here can help you in terms of moving forward? And that opened up something which was extraordinarily powerful. And there are multiple ways of doing that. We can also talk about those. Parnita, there was a question. Was keen to know how Pradeep introduced this, or does a smooth transition to make them feel comfortable to share openly? What would one say to allow them to feel okay to be vulnerable and have confidence in the coach as well? Yeah. So I can add to, Pradeep, if you could share your experiences.
Sure. So Parinata, it's about a couple of things. First and foremost, as I said, when you walk in, they see you as an authority figure, right? My focus is to break that, because then they expect the learning to come from you, whereas the learning's really got to come from each one of their shared experiences, because that's the power of this process that we have, right? The way I do it is I basically say it just like Ram gave an example, right? He asked, what can you get out of each other? In this particular case, they've already come with an expectation that they'll get something out of this program. So my words are, you actually bring a lot of experience and you can help others as well as learn from others in this process. And this is how it's going to happen. I'm here only to help, to ask questions where I think those questions are relevant and where I think you're learning, you might want to look at and maybe ask other people for very specific experience if I have an observation to make, right? Second, how you introduce yourself. If in my introduction, this is all my experience, okay? No one's just learned out of habit. In my experience, if I sort of focus on my achievements, so to speak, or anything, then what am I doing? I'm setting a context, possibly for a competitive setup. I have to avoid that. So I'm just here to help you learn, right? So these are the kind of things that you have to do, and you have to recognize that, like in any situation. So, how you behave also sets the context. While it seems very, very small and very minor, I don't know what Ram feels about it, but your actions, your behaviors goes a long way in creating that environment that we are talking about of learning. That's what I would say. Those are my two thoughts.
Yeah. I add a little bit to that. Before that, I'll come back to what Parinita you asked, because that's probably the most fundamental and critical part in terms of how do you make the team comfortable. And I keep talking about it all the time. those of you who are not familiar, please go back to Project Aristotle, Google that. It's actually a Google study that was done over several years at a cost of over $400 million. And they identified these 5 areas. Probably I'm repeating it for the nth time here. Psychological safety being the most important, which then creates interdependability. And then goals in terms of clarity of communication of goals and how they are structured to support the fulfillment of those goals, and a meta goal. Every organization, does it have a goal larger than its purely financial and transactional endpoint? So some of these things come together to create the team work powerfully, but there are specific processes that would also help. Before that, I just want to address what Manu said. Yeah, I mean, the team coaching, fundamentally, team coaching is very, very different from individual coaching. You are not addressing each individual separately, but you are trying to address as well the larger group which is forming the team. There are multiple nodal points, and therefore the energies that are coming are very different. It's more of an art than a science. If coaching is more a science, even coaching many people would feel is an art, but it's much more of an art. It's much more of feely, touchy kind of stuff that you're moving towards. Typically, the way that I do, different people may do it differently. I would start with a 1-day or a 2-day session. And this process is explained in Coacharya website called the SPEED process, which comes under systemic team coaching. And I'll take you briefly through that process as well now. And typically, I would follow that with at least about 9 sessions of about 3 hours each. So totally, the entire team coaching process, the systemic coaching process would be somewhere close to about 60 hours. And it's not cheap, but the point is that it can, I have done it for more, but typically I would prefer a group of about 12 people. It creates enough energy, it is not too many. And then if you divide it by the number of heads, it's far, far cheaper than individual coaching. And systemic coaching doesn't mean that you stop with team coaching. You can also work with individuals. In the process of team coaching, you will find that there are certain other, like what Pradeep so correctly put it, as a context which are coming up. And these contexts can be in resonance, the context can be in dissonance. And you may then need to identify certain people, and you might want to work with them individually as well, depending upon their criticality to the organization. So systemic coaching is both individual coaching as well as team coaching, or a blend of both, and then towards a larger organizational objective. I'll stop here at this point in time. But before that, before I finish, we have lost Ujjwal for, I don't know, probably his bandwidth was not good. He's not there anymore. Going back to what Parinita asked, what I personally work with is a kind of an appreciative inquiry process in terms of team building. Many of you may have heard of this very, very simple explanation of how team building works. There are these stages of norming, forming, storming, and transforming. Different people use it in different ways. I always believe that you start with certain norms, and those norms are more about behavior, that you should behave appropriately, appreciatively. You should not criticize in a group, and whatever you are going to say should be honest and authentic. At the same time, you should be careful about how it lands on other people. So something straightforward. You can't come there and say, hey, this is what I feel, and it's going to be nasty. And the other person also can say that same thing. And at the end, you are ending up with a violent discussion rather than anything leading to anything productive. So there have to be certain clear, in one of the early meetings that I attended much before I learned about all these coachings and all that, the facilitator put down, asked people to put down what the norms of the group meetings are. So one of the people there said, you shouldn't spit at each other. So I thought it was damn funny. But the point was that, yeah, it's quite possible, because the way people behave, sometimes it's almost like spitting at each other. Even if you're not doing it literally, you're doing it figuratively. And that really damages the entire meeting. So you start with the norming. And the second is the forming. The forming is really the most critical part of a team. What I do is an appreciative inquiry process. Those of you who are familiar, David Cooper-Ryder's appreciative inquiry process has these 4 or 5 elements. The first one is discovery. Each one discovers about the other person. Each one shares in some way. They come around with stories. And something like earlier I said, asking those people, what are your aspirations? What is it that needs to happen to be able to fulfill it? What is blocking it, etc. Could be a discovery process. But typically what I would normally ask them to do is to talk about something not negative, but far more positive in terms of sharing. What is it that has really been a transformatory moment in your life? And I've had some amazing experiences of people then opening up spontaneously and talking about situations, nothing to do with the work that they are doing, where they have been in life and death situation. One guy I remember talked about an earthquake that he was in when he was in Japan, where everything was falling around him. Another person was kidnapped in Nigeria. And maybe if the group was appropriate, it could be somebody on a 9/11 kind of situations, etc. People talk about those and what happened at that point in time, what transformationally happened. What it does is, and exactly what Parinita put down there, that it makes people vulnerable. And when they have vulnerability, other people, human tendency is you come together to help in some way. You extend that hand of welcome, you extend that hand of support. And gradually, so long as what they are conveying is authentic and it resonates with people, and especially something in about need, what I went through, and these are the kind of things which resonate with people. And we have a ground rule saying that you should only look at from an appreciative inquiry process, appreciative process. Then in that case, people also, I actually go around the group and asking them to, I say that you have to say something. If there's a group is small, one person speaks and all the other, say 10 people, other 9 people will have to say something necessarily, mandatorily, and it has to be something appreciative. I said, if you have nothing else to say, at least say the person is wearing a nice dress, the hair looks good, or you speak well, whatever it is, even if you can't figure out anything nice about what they are saying. But very often, that sharing, somehow you would find it difficult to understand, perhaps unless you've been through these processes, makes people very emotional. They actually start connecting. And that's what I think is really the difference between a group and a team. It's not merely a common objective that a team has, that a group may not necessarily have, but in a team situation, apart from a commonality in terms of objectives, there is also a clear emotional bond of common interest, about commonality, about resonance, about vulnerability, and all that kind of stuff. So I think I mentioned this before, when we do some of these programs, several of them I have done in the US with my son. And one of the things when they ask him, what is it that we need to bring to the table? He usually tells them, brings a lot of Kleenex tissues, because people are bound to cry. And they do become so emotional. And there are many ways in which you can sort of use it differently, what are processes, but essentially it's one of bringing out from deep within your own innermost feelings about situations that you've gone through, something that you would like to convey to other people as being the most momentous in your life, and that sort of resonates with other people. So this is the part of discovery. I'm sure there are a million ways of how you can do that. This is how I do it. And then once that is formed, then we go into the next stage, which what Peter Hawkins talks about, the process of clarifying or creating a vision, where I give them poster papers with a lot of crayons and stuff. And it's a right brain activity. They sit down there and put down their vision as to what they would like that group to be, that team to be. What would they like the organization to be? There's some broad definitions which are given before that. And you will find that something truly amazing happens. If there are a group of about 12 people, I split them into the 3 groups of 4 people. They work together, and then they come back and present each other in a visual form. What is it that they are looking at as a vision? And it's a vision that they own. The power of this is in terms of creating something, not because the team leader says so, but because you, each person individually, you are bringing, like what Pradeep said earlier, the context into that situation. You are bringing it there and you're making it applicable. And based on that context, you are developing a visual. And the visual, in many ways, uninhibits your other blocks within you far more than if you start putting them into Excel sheets. I hate Excel sheets in these kind of exercises. I ban them. So basically, in terms of visuals, if you created a right-brained approach in terms of what you might call as a dream stage in appreciative inquiry, you create that vision. And then you synthesize in that vision, and you'll usually find that many of the points that they have put down will fall into 3 or 4 buckets. So once you've got those in your hand, you can go through what is called a design process in terms of up to the point of the vision. It doesn't have any limitations of boundaries, resources, people, etc., etc. This is what you want to reach. This is how we want to go. And then in design stage, you might be putting down some broader frameworks of how many people do you need and so on and so forth. It's almost like a mini action plan that is being developed that also is done in small groups. And here you might like to do that with certain expertise. You might want to put the marketing people together, the finance people together, or the HR people together, or something of that sort. And then they come back and then again they synthesize. And finally, you have a plan, in a sense, a nascent plan, which they can later develop. And you get into a discussion about how do we move forward. And in appreciative inquiry is typically called the destiny stage, where you are really looking at what the future holds and how can it be done. And what I typically do at that stage is make each person take responsibility for some specific actions. So at the end of the session, maybe it's a day for small groups, maybe sometimes 2 days, they actually write down on a piece of paper that this is what the team agreed, this is what I take responsibility for. And then using that as a framework, as a dashboard, the group develops a proper action plan. And every month, for a few hours, you get together to review. The coach is not a technical expert, not an operational expert. The coach is there purely to go into the dynamics of what is happening within the group. Okay, have you fulfilled what you set out to do in the next session? But if you haven't, what is it that is holding you back? What is it that can be done to move forward? And you, believe you me, this kind of a program can work miracles, absolutely miracles. And I've seen this happen, completely turn around the mindset of people, moving them forward. So this is a broad process, and you can, it's, again, a lot of it, we can keep on gathering more knowledge, this process and that process, whether Peter Hawkins is better or somebody else's is better, and so on and so forth. It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, you have a bunch of knowledge, put it together and go on, experiment with that and try and find out, does it work for you? And that's what Pradeep said earlier. Much depends on what you bring to the table as a coach, what you bring to the table as a facilitator, as an equal with those people, learning along with them, what is happening. And that is what leads to a point which is often ignored in any coaching, including individual coaching, is about the energy. What is the energy that you are bringing in to that conversation, even as an individual? Yeah, when we talk about a coach being invisible, this question is often asked of me. Oh, you say the coach should be invisible. And very often I say presence means absence. You should be absent. It doesn't mean that you're not contributing anything. It's that your ego is absent. Your judgment is absent. You are invisible in terms of being a smart ass. You just are there as a learner, as a support system with unconditional positive regard in generative listening. And if you're able to do that, that energy that you bring in partnering with a client is the most important value that you can add. And in a group situation, this becomes even more important because there are multiple people with multiple contexts. And the system requires certain things to happen. And this is not going to happen just by itself. There has to be an energy that needs to shift that. So you as a coach, you are going to bring that energy for shifting. And that's really what is extraordinarily important, which is usually what is ignored. We start getting into the nitty-gritties. Oh, I want to follow this process. I want to do the constellation approach. I want to do the appreciative. And I can give you a whole bunch of a dozen processes. It doesn't help. You can read about all of them by Googling or whatever. We can talk about it in future sessions. But far more important is to focus on what is the energy that I'm bringing into that table? How am I able to look at beyond the words that people are talking about? What is the emotion? What is the energy that is coming in from the participants? And as a coach, can you share with them what is it that is happening to you as you are in that group? And this is equally true in individual coaching as well. And one of the things that we keep emphasizing, Pradeep will attest to that, is when we work with people for MCC batches, and Pradeep was one of them, is to not only be able to listen actively and be able to share with the client what is it that you are observing about the client in terms of the words not said, in terms of the emotions, in terms of the energies, but also, as appropriate, occasionally share, what do I feel as a coach? How has it landed on me? So what do you think? And the client can disagree. The transformational part in many of the coaching sessions I've had is when the client disagrees. No, Ram, that's not quite how it's landed on me. This is how I look at it. And suddenly there is a shift. There's something that tremendously powerful happens. So the coach should be vulnerable to be able to present, put in front of the client, place in front of the client, this is what I think, this is how I feel, this is how I sense. Does it make sense to you? And if the client says, no, what you say is totally nonsense to me, that's fine too. Do you have that ability to be vulnerable and accept as a learner? Okay, Pradeep.
Just to carry forward what you're saying, Ram, is what you now talked about, the individual coaching piece. Just for all those on participants who or attendees who have sort of not done systemic coaching, just take that and multiply that by the number of people in a systemic coaching group, because that's what you have to take care of, is those energies and those shifts in energies that are occurring, not just between you as a coach and an individual, but you as a coach and a group of X individuals, and you as a coach observing what's happening between each pair of those X individuals. And that's where, therefore, just your presence, your listening capability, your own willingness to be vulnerable, your own willingness not to bring your agenda to the table, all of those things which we are taught as a coach applies here. It just gets multiplied every moment by the number of people who are in that group. And therefore, it's a question of understanding the forces.
Yeah. Mohan had asked a question. Yeah, when you talk about accountability, Mohan, first thing you need to figure out is, what is blocking that accountability, or what is shifting that accountability? Everybody has an accountability. That's not the problem. The trouble is, when you're looking at it from a systemic perspective, the accountability is very often in most companies today, that the problem I see is for themselves, for their team, for their silos, for their businesses, for their functions. It's not for the larger organization. And so when you're looking at it piecemeal like this, the whole problem is that what is true for that individual cell or a silo is not necessarily true as a larger system. And it may seem ironical, but it's not. The sum of those parts do not necessarily become the whole or greater than the whole, unless they are all aligned. Very often they are not. Most organizations that I see are completely siloed, because The way that our risk and reward systems work in most organizations today, corporate organizations, is that you are rewarded for personal achievements. And therefore, very often this is interpreted as, if I can do something by being smarter than the other guy, so if I want to be taller than others, easier for me to chop the feet off or the head off rather than my growing taller. So in a systemic approach, the accountability factor would have, I would imagine, two components, though I have not consciously thought about it before. And I'm really thinking on my feet in terms of this question that you have asked. The first part is, how do I inspire them, motivate them, get them to agree to drop their personal agendas and personal accountabilities? And then look at the larger collective. And if that happens, then that whole systemic approach becomes successful. And the precondition to this is that then they need to empathize with each other. They need to bond with each other. They need to form a team. So I would say that when you talked about, Lencioni, the dysfunctions and so on, many of this happen as a result of the fact that there is no alignment between the members, which is leading into differences in terms of context, differences in terms of agenda. So can you get them to meet together on some common points? And that common point need not necessarily be a business issue. That common point very often is a human issue. Can we all come together on a human plane, on an energy plane? What is it that can bring us together? And that actually is what takes the maximum time. Sometimes even with a group of 10 people, it takes me a whole day, because that's one of the things that I tell people. I can't guarantee that what time it'll finish, because I'm not going to stop anybody midway in terms of what they are saying. So sometimes there may be a person who opens up and he talks for about an hour. And what I may have scheduled as a 1 day to complete the process may not happen in 1 day. So if you allow that time for people to really bond, and I've had situations where people have worked together for 20 years and they come together, and in this kind of a meeting at the end of 1 day, they say that, in the last 20 years that I've worked in this group, no one has ever understood me. No one has appreciated me. It has always been that they point out when there's something wrong happens, but never about when something good happens. And this is the first time I felt truly appreciated. And that feeling alone creates, finally, a sense of accountability for the larger system. I mean, I'm not probably specifically addressing what you're saying, but at the end of the session in 2 days or 1 day, or whatever the time is, if you really ask them to sit down and then say, hey, this is what you guys agreed. This is how you developed your own vision. This is how you developed your own action plan. Now, what is that accountability that you want to take? You'll find every single person I have seen comes back on a piece of paper, writing down, this is what I'm accountable for. And they submit it to the team leader in that particular session. And that is what we move forward with, for what it is worth. I think that is...
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, sure, please.
So to me, I must confess that I'm not one of those who have a very strong theoretical, frameworks, or actually use consciously frameworks and processes. So my responses and these things are purely experiential. To me, the accountability when it comes to working with a group, because systemic coaching is working with a group, right? Whether the group is formed earlier, the group is formed between, doesn't matter. The accountability gets set from the contracting stage itself. I'll give you a classic example of this. Tom referred to the process labs, right? Earlier in the course of this conversation, Ram, and you talked about how powerful it is. For those of you who have attended the process lab, there is no agenda that's set whatsoever, right? It's just a set of individuals who have got together in a group, and no one tells them what to do. It's just a set of people sitting down, and you know that there is a facilitator sitting there. The facilitator doesn't open his or her mouth. then how is it that people come up with their life stories or whatever they have to say, and they open up very, very quickly. They talk about themselves, which is, how come they are willing to be vulnerable right up front? To me, it's in the context setting. They have come there because they have seen a brochure. The brochure outlines what you can expect, doesn't tell you all the details. They have heard word by mouth that this is what the outcome of a process lab is. And therefore, they're coming in with that expectation. I hope that sort of helps you understand how the accountability piece starts right from the context setting, because it's in your contract, sorry, not context setting, in your contracting. Because in your contracting, you're trying to understand what it is that they want and how your process will give it to them, right? At the end of the day. It then follows through in every step that you do. At the end of it, it's the things that Ram said. Or the vulnerability that people have exposed themselves to, that vulnerability leads to a certain amount of emotional, I don't know whether fragile is the word right now. I'm not getting any other word. A little bit of emotional fragility. That emotional fragility seeks safety, and the safety comes from the safety of the group, and therefore the larger commitment to the group. That's how accountability gets built. Of course, there are processes that you will facilitate in terms of writing down action points, whatever it is, but that's not how accountability is formed. Accountability, I think, is formed right through the process.
Thanks, Pradeep. We are almost there on top of the hour. What I would suggest is this. One of the things I think Narayan has said here about talking about systemic with a peer. Actually, systemic coaching doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a group setting in which it is done. You can actually work with an individual client and use the systemic approach in terms of bringing the system into the room rather than having the system of everybody in the room itself. And one of the approaches which is very, very powerful on this is called constellations. There's a great book by John Whittington, which is also, there's a bit of a review in somewhere in the website, which I had done a while ago. And if any of you is willing, and if you have a case that you would like to discuss in the next session, and what you need to have, if the person agrees, you can have a chat with me before, that you need to have a table on which you have maybe some visual stuff. I mean, it could be anything from a stapler to a punch to some kind of small figurines or whatever it is, which represents different people. Even coffee mugs and things like that will do. If you have those kind of things, we can experiment with the constellation approach. Extremely powerful. Yeah, Whittington. The Magda has put down that title out there. And this is certainly will be extremely valuable. And I've been recently taking a cohort that I'm working with into constellation, and there have been some amazing kind of insights in terms of what they've had, fairly powerful, and maybe that would help for you as well. So before I close, I just would like to again invite you, please register for the colloquium. If you can, all the 24 days or 25 days, you get 36 hours, which is enough for your CCUs. Even if your credential renewals are a year away or something, it's worthwhile accumulating them at this point in time. So wish you the very best, and see you next week, next month in this session. Thank you.